I watched from my porch, said nothing, did nothing, and I want to be honest with you right now, before this story goes any further, I did not set a trap for her, I did not trick her, I did not bait her, goad her, manipulate her, or provoke her in any way. What I did was buy a planter, put a tree in it, and refuse to move it. Everything that happened after that, that was entirely her choice. Every single time. Pause. Now, I'm going to tell you exactly how it got to the point where my neighbor, a grown adult, fractured 2 toes kicking what is essentially a small concrete monument while wearing flip-flops in front of 4 witnesses. Because I think once you understand the full picture, you're going to understand something important about HOA neighborhoods that nobody in the welcome packet tells you. There is always a Karen, and the only question is whether she picks you. She picked me. Pause. It started on a Thursday. I want to paint you this scene properly because the details matter. It was a Thursday. I remember it specifically because I had just done a full grocery run and I was carrying 4 bags, a gallon of milk, and the kind of exhaustion that only a Thursday grocery trip can produce. Not Monday energy, not Friday excitement. Thursday tired, where you just want to unload and sit down and exist quietly for 30 minutes. I pull into the driveway, I grab my bags, and tucked under my front door, not in the mailbox, not mailed, hand-delivered under my door, is a bright orange flyer. Bold letters at the top, HOA violation notice. Now, if you've never lived in an HOA neighborhood, let me give you a quick education. A violation notice is not like a parking ticket. It's more of a social assassination attempt. It's someone in your neighborhood saying formally and officially, I find your existence aesthetically problematic. My first reaction was genuine confusion. I had literally walked my property that morning. The grass was trimmed, the edging was clean, nothing was out of place. I stood in my driveway, grocery bag cutting into my arm, trying to figure out what I had possibly done. I set the bags on the porch and read the full description. And then, I actually laughed, out loud, on my front porch, alone. The violation: decorative structure encroaching on shared visual space and disrupting neighborhood aesthetic cohesion. Decorative structure. You know what this decorative structure was? I'll tell you exactly what it was. A planter, roughly the size of a medium dog, holding a small ornamental tree, sitting 4 feet from the sidewalk, completely, unambiguously, surveyor confirmably, on my property. Now here's what you need to understand about this planter, because this detail matters later. I didn't buy this on an impulse. When I moved into this neighborhood, I read the entire HOA bylaws document. All 47 pages. I know, but I'd heard stories. So I read all 47 pages, I highlighted the relevant sections on exterior structures, and when I chose this planter, I cross-referenced it against material, approved, dimensions, within limit, setback from sidewalk, compliant, setback from property line, compliant. This planter wasn't close to a gray area, it was textbook compliant. By every single metric they had written down, it was completely, boringly fine. So I wasn't panicked. I was annoyed. Mildly, the way you get annoyed when someone cuts you off and then goes the speed limit. And I already knew who filed the complaint. I knew immediately. Karen. She lives directly across the street. And I mean directly. When you're standing at my front door, you are looking straight at her living room window. I had noticed her at that window a few times before, arms crossed, watching. I'd kind of assumed she was just bored, the way some people get when they retire or their kids leave the house. I thought she was just watching the neighborhood for entertainment. But this notice made it clear. She wasn't watching for entertainment. She was evaluating. And my planter had failed the evaluation. My first instinct was to be charitable. I told myself, she's just having a bad day. She was probably a little wound up about something and took it out on the HOA complaint form. It would probably get dismissed. I would email the board, show my receipts, and that would be the end of it. Looking back, I genuinely want to shake myself for being that naive. I sent a polite, professional email to the HOA board that same Thursday evening. I attached the relevant bylaw sections, highlighted the compliance points, included a photo of the planter with measurements, and requested the violation notice be formally rescinded. And then, something happened that should have been my first real warning sign. They responded in under 24 hours. Now, if you have ever dealt with an HOA board about anything at all, you know that 24 hours is not normal. These are the same people who take 6 weeks to respond to a water pressure complaint. HOA boards operate on geological time. Things are reviewed, tabled, escalated, discussed, retabled, and eventually addressed sometime before your lease expires. But this came back in under 24 hours. And it wasn't an apology, it was a second warning. Same language, same accusation. And at the bottom, buried at the very bottom like a legal footnote, was this sentence: "The complaint was submitted by a resident with documented concerns about visual corridor integrity in the cul-de-sac area." Read that phrase again. Visual corridor integrity. That's not how a frustrated neighbor talks. That's not someone who glanced out their window and dashed off an email. That's someone who sat down, opened the HOA bylaws document, found the most technical-sounding language possible, and used it strategically. This wasn't a neighbor venting. This was a prepared filing. And I sat there in my kitchen reading that phrase, and I had this quiet, settled, low feeling in my stomach. The kind that doesn't feel like panic. It feels more like recognition. This isn't ending. I didn't move the planter. 2 days after the second warning, I was in the backyard doing maintenance. Earbuds in, music up. I wasn't watching the front of the house. About an hour later, I came inside, and something looked off through the front window. I couldn't tell at first what it was, and then I registered it. The planter was on its side. The small ornamental tree was half out of the soil. The roots were exposed, and there was a crack running along the base. I went to my security camera footage. At 2:47 p.m. on that Sunday, in broad afternoon daylight, Karen walked across the street, stepped onto my lawn, looked left, looked right, and then she wound up like she was attempting a field goal conversion and kicked it. The planter rocked. She stood there, looked at it, and then walked back across the street, went inside, and closed her door. I watched that footage 3 times. I want to be very clear about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even disbelief. It was something closer to clarity, the way a photograph develops, and you finally see what was always there. She wasn't having a bad day when she filed that first complaint. She wasn't frustrated. She had decided, for whatever reason she had decided, that she wanted my planter gone, and she was willing to cross the street and physically destroy my property to make that happen. I did not call the police. I did not confront her. I did not move the planter. I repaired it, backed up the footage in 3 places, and I said out loud, to no one, the sentence I am now deeply embarrassed by. It was just a bad day for her. But here's the thing. I didn't say it with sympathy this time. I said it with the quiet, patient calm of someone who has decided to let a situation play all the way out. Because I had footage, and that footage was going to keep getting more valuable every single time she made a choice. Let me stop here and give you proper context on Karen, because she is not just a difficult neighbor, she is an institution. Karen has lived on this street for over a decade. She has attended every HOA meeting, not as a passive attendee, as a participant. She is the person who puts things on the agenda. She is the person who references the bylaws by page number. She once, and I want you to really sit with this, she once convinced the board to issue a formal warning to a family 4 houses down because their welcome mat was, quote, visually inconsistent with the neighborhood's established aesthetic tone. A welcome mat. She filed a complaint about a welcome mat. These are not the actions of someone who is occasionally opinionated. This is someone who has deliberately and methodically built influence within the HOA structure over a period of years. The fast second warning? That wasn't the board being efficient. That was Karen having a direct line to someone on the board who moved when she called. I was not dealing with a difficult neighbor. I was dealing with a power structure. And she had been running this power structure, unchallenged, for a long time. I was going to need to be very, very patient. About a week after the first kick, I had repaired the planter with concrete patch compound and placed it back in the exact same spot. I was doing yard work when Karen walked across the street. Not stomping, not yelling, walking calmly with a smile on her face, which, let me tell you, is more unsettling than stomping. She said, I think we need to have a conversation about this structure. I set down my gardening tool, stood up straight, and told her the planter was fully compliant with the HOA guidelines, and I intended to keep it there. She tilted her head slightly, the smile didn't waver, and said, the rules say one thing, but the spirit of the rules says another. And I want to pause on that sentence because it is one of the most revealing things anyone has ever said to me. The spirit of the rules. What she was telling me was, I have decided this planter doesn't belong here, and I'm going to use whatever mechanism I can to remove it, and the actual written rules are just an obstacle I'm choosing to work around. I told her I wasn't interested in the spirit of anything. The planter met every written requirement, and it was staying. She smiled, turned around, walked back to her door. 30 seconds, that's how long it took. 30 seconds after her door closed, I heard footsteps. Fast, purposeful, coming back across the street. I looked up. Karen's face was completely different. Whatever composure she'd walked over with was gone. It was replaced by something raw and furious. She marched past me, pointed at the planter, and at a volume loud enough that Janet, my neighbor 2 houses down who was out with her garden hose, visibly looked up. "It doesn't belong here!" And she kicked it. This was not the cautious, look left, look right kick of a week ago. This was a full, committed, emotional, everything behind it kick. The kind of kick that was meant to end the conversation. The planter cracked down the middle. The tree spilled out. Soil scattered across my lawn. She stood there, breathing hard, looking at me, daring me to react. I looked at her. I looked at the shattered planter. I looked at Janet, standing with her garden hose, watching. And I said absolutely nothing. I turned around, walked inside, and closed her door. I heard her say something as I walked away. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was triumphant. The tone of someone who believes they've won. She had not won. That night, I pulled up the camera footage and watched the whole sequence again, slowly. And the second time through, I caught something I had missed in real time. Her right hand. Down at her side, throughout the entire encounter, her right hand was holding her phone, screen facing outward, in the position you use when you're filming something with your hand held low to avoid being obvious about it. Karen had not snapped. She had walked inside, pulled out her phone, hit record, and walked back out to perform a meltdown while secretly filming me. She wasn't losing control, she was building a case file. She needed me to react. She needed me to yell or push her or get in her face or do anything she could take to the HOA board as evidence that I was the problem. She had staged the entire thing, and I had given her silence. And my camera had given me everything. I want to be honest with you. At this point, I was not calm because I am some kind of Zen master. I was calm because I had decided that calm was the sharpest possible weapon in this situation. Every time she escalated, she was writing new pages of a story that was entirely in my favor. I just had to not interfere with the story, so I started planning. First thing the next morning, I drove to the HOA management office in person. I did not email, I did not call. I went in person because showing up in person communicates something an email doesn't. I met with the property manager. I sat across from her, opened my laptop, and walked her through everything. The original violation notice, my compliance emails, the board's second warning with the visual corridor integrity language, the footage from the first kick, the cautious, premeditated one, the footage from the second kick, the staged, recorded one. She watched without saying much, and when it was done, I asked her one question. "Has anyone filed a complaint against me in the last 30 days? She hesitated, just for a second. That hesitation told me everything. I was barely halfway home when my phone buzzed. "Formal complaint filed against you. Response required." Karen had filed a complaint against me, not about the planter, for intimidating behavior and creating a hostile environment. The timestamp matched the evening of the second kick. She had submitted it that same night, probably before the dirt on my lawn had finished drying. But here's where her plan had a hole in it. The HOA complaint system required supporting evidence to be submitted within 5 business days of the initial filing. She hadn't attached her footage yet. That gave me a 5-day window, and I knew exactly what to do with it. I called Mike. If you live in an HOA neighborhood long enough, you learn that every street has a Mike. The neighbor who's been there long enough to know where all the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking. Mike has lived on this street for 11 years. When I told him what was happening, he went quiet. Then he said, "She's done this before." He told me Karen had a pattern. She files preemptive complaints against you before she acts, so that by the time she does something, there's already a paper trail making you look like the aggressor. She'd done it at least twice that he knew of, and both times the board had sided with her. But then I found something in the public record that changed my understanding of this situation entirely. 2 years before I moved in, 2 years before I ever touched this property, Karen had filed a formal complaint with the county mediation office against the previous owner of my house, not the HOA, the county, about an improperly placed decorative stone border. The county dismissed it, so she went to the HOA, joined committees, built relationships, spent 2 years cultivating influence, and then she went to work on the previous owner through the HOA channels instead. The previous owner eventually moved. I do not know if Karen was the reason they moved. I genuinely don't. But I know that she had spent 2 years building a system for exactly this kind of campaign, and now I was the new owner. And my planter had triggered it. She had been patient and methodical and strategic for years. so I decided to be more patient. I spent 2 evenings doing research. I found a contractor who specialized in decorative concrete work. I explained what I wanted: a planter, same dimensions, same tree, same spot, but with a concrete footing poured 18 inches into the ground, reinforced with steel rebar and anchor bolts. Before the contractor came, I emailed the HOA and asked, in writing, for formal confirmation that a permanent decorative garden structure of these specific dimensions in this specific location was compliant with all relevant bylaws. They confirmed it in writing. I printed the email. I screenshotted it. I saved it in 3 separate locations, including a cloud backup. And then I called the contractor. The contractor came on a Thursday afternoon. The process took about 3 hours total. When it was done, the concrete set, the tree replanted, the surface finished, the planter looked identical to the original one. Same material, same tree, same spot, same dimensions. But what was underneath it was something else entirely. This planter was now sitting on 18 inches of steel-reinforced concrete footing, anchor-bolted into the ground. I'm not a structural engineer, but I have been assured by someone who is that what now sat on my front lawn was functionally immovable by any means short of heavy machinery or a demolition permit. I stood back and looked at it for a long moment. I didn't build it for her, I told myself. I built it for me. I wanted this to end. I wanted the planter to be so permanent, so documented, so unassailable that the conversation had nowhere left to go. I did not fully anticipate how the conversation would end. For about a week after the installation, nothing happened. Karen's window light was on. I could see her silhouette occasionally. Watching, I went about my life. I mowed the lawn. I took out the trash. I watered the planter. I waited. What I was waiting for, I think, was one of 2 things. Either she would accept that this was over, or she would make one more choice. She made one more choice. It was a Saturday morning. I was on my porch with coffee. It was a nice morning, the kind where you're not really doing anything, just existing outside, and it feels like a small victory. Karen's door opened. Even from across the street, I could tell immediately that she was not in a casual mood. There was something about the way she walked. Purposeful, tight, like she had made a decision and was executing it. She came directly across the street, directly to the planter, and she stopped. She looked at it. She looked at me, and she said, "I know exactly what you did, and I'm going to have this removed. I want to walk you through what I was thinking in this moment, because I think it's important. I was not nervous, I was not angry, I was something I can only describe as completely at peace, in the way that you can only be at peace when you have done everything right and have documentation proving you've done everything right." I said very calmly, "It's compliant. I have that in writing." She said, "I don't care what you have in writing." And there it is, that sentence. That is the sentence that tells you everything about what you're dealing with. Not, "I disagree with the ruling," not, "I'm going to dispute that," just, "I don't care what the rules say, because I have decided this is going to go my way." Her face changed. The controlled anger gave way to something rawer. She pulled her foot back, and she kicked it, with everything she had. The kind of kick that was meant to be the final, definitive, conversation-ending kick. The kind of kick that, the previous 2 times, had sent things flying, cracking, scattering. The planter did not move. Not a millimeter, not a fraction of a millimeter. 18 inches of steel-reinforced concrete absorbed the full impact of her kick the way a mountain absorbs a punch. The sound was not the sound of a planter breaking. It was a different kind of crack entirely. Karen made a sound I will not attempt to describe here because I don't have the right words for it. Somewhere between a shriek and a bark. And she stumbled backward and sat down hard on my lawn. She was clutching her foot. Her face had gone completely white. And here is the detail I have saved for this moment. Look down at her feet. Are you looking? Flip-flops. Thin. Rubber. Summer flip-flops. This woman, who had already kicked concrete twice, who had watched concrete crack a planter, who had spent weeks plotting a 3rd attempt, had shown up to kick an 18-inch reinforced concrete footing with the confidence of someone wearing steel-toed boots in the footwear you wear to the beach. The audacity of that. The absolute committed audacity. I stood up from my chair. I want to be transparent. I am not a person who enjoys watching someone get hurt. What I felt in this moment was not satisfaction. Or at least, not only satisfaction. Mostly I felt something closer to disbelief that this had actually happened. I looked at her sitting on my lawn, holding her foot, eyes watering, and I said the only thing I could say, "Are you okay?" She looked up at me, and her voice, which up until this point had always carried this weight of authority and certainty, was small. It was genuinely small. "I think I broke my toe." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. and I meant it. Janet, from 2 houses down, was watching. She made a sound, an involuntary, honest sound. I won't call it a laugh because I think that would be uncharitable to Janet, but she made a sound. 2 other neighbors had appeared at some point during this. I hadn't noticed them, but they were there. They had seen it. Karen noticed. In that moment, sitting on my lawn, foot in her hands, surrounded by neighbors who had watched the whole thing, I saw it on her face. The realization, not just that she had hurt herself, but that she had lost the audience. The neighbors weren't looking at her with sympathy or concern. They were looking at her the way you look at something that has finally made complete sense. She got up. She limped back across the street. Her door closed. My lawn was quiet. The planter was still there. She went to urgent care that afternoon. Not 1 fractured toe. 2. I know this because, about 10 days later, I received a letter from her attorney. The letter claimed that my planter was a hazardous installation created with the foreseeable intent of causing physical harm and suggested I should anticipate further legal action. I read that letter twice, and then I sat down and compiled what I had, the original HOA violation notice, filed against me for a compliant planter, my initial compliance emails with the board's responses, the board's written confirmation that the permanent installation was compliant, the contractor's invoice with full materials and specifications, a property survey confirming the planter was entirely on my land, the footage of the first kick, the cautious, premeditated one, the footage of the second kick, the staged, filmed on her own phone one, the footage of the third kick, captured on 2 separate cameras from 2 different angles. And Janet. I formatted all of it into a single organized folder with a cover letter. I sent it to the HOA board with a formal written request that all complaints filed by Karen against me be reviewed, reconsidered, and dismissed, and noted clearly that I was prepared to share this documentation with any relevant legal county or civil authority that requested it. And then I waited again. I'm good at waiting. Mike was at the board.